Registrar Corp for Unpacking U.S. FDA Food Labeling and Ingredient Regulation, What Companies Must Know Before Exporting. We'll be discussing the ingredient and labeling rules and regulations for food products distributed in the U.S. I'm proud to introduce Anna Benavente, Registrar Corp's Director of Regulatory Affairs, who will be leading this webinar. She holds a Bachelor of Science degree in biology from the College of William and Mary and has over 15 years of experience in analytical research. Since joining Registrar Corp in 2009, her team has reviewed over 13,000 products for FDA compliance. Throughout this webinar, feel free to write any questions in the Q&A box, and we've saved time at the end to answer them. We'll also follow up with a link to the recording so you can refer back to this at any time. Without further ado, Anna, take it away.
Hi, good morning. Thank you, Christina, so much for the kind introduction. I'm very excited to be able to present to you all today. I'm certainly glad that you're all able to join us after our technical issues, probably related to the Cloudflare outage that happened yesterday. So I'm so glad that you were able to rejoin us today. Now, these are the topics that we're going to be covering in our webinar. First, we will discuss what every food company must know before they start exporting food products to the U.S. FDA's oversight of foods, and two important questions that every company must ask related to their ingredients and their labels. In our next section, we'll describe how a company determines if their product's ingredients are acceptable to FDA. We'll go over how FDA regulates food ingredients and designates them as safe, and common mistakes made by food companies before they ship. We'll also discuss the new policies being implemented for color additives. We'll follow up with the labeling requirements that all food labels must meet. All of the general mandatory labeling elements will be described, and we'll go over additional labeling considerations, such as nutrient and organic claims, as well as some new guidance from FDA related to allergens. We will also discuss the new requirement for the claim that a product is healthy, and touch upon the proposed rule FDA has issued regarding front of package labeling, as well as common mistakes that are often made in labeling. And then finally, we'll present to you Registrar Corp solutions to help your company achieve compliance and ensure trouble-free exportation to the US. We'll finish up with our question and answer period and try to get to as many of them as we can. Now, for those of you who may be unfamiliar with Registrar Corp, we are a firm that specializes in FDA regulatory compliance with over 30,000 clients in over 190 countries. We have 20 offices worldwide to assist our clients in their time zones and languages. We're very proud to have a high level of satisfaction from our customers and over 20 years of service to companies in the food, supplement, cosmetic, drug, and device industries. We offer 27 different services and software options to help your firm achieve compliance with your information protected by a system that is ISO certified and backed by a team of regulatory experts totaling over 460 years of experience. Our product labeling, ingredient review, and import alert team of experienced professionals hold multiple advanced degrees in the areas of biology, chemistry, quality management, botany, and cosmetic sciences. And we take enormous pride in ensuring that our clients meet FDA's requirements. Now, as most people know, the US food market is incredibly large, with revenues of almost $1 trillion projected in 2025. Now, for many companies, exportation to the US is a significant way to increase the value and financial growth of their businesses. Companies that successfully export to the US can often count upon a consistent revenue stream in a market that continues to expand. However, many pitfalls can occur between a company and its financial windfall in the US market. FDA regulations are strict, so a company must ask itself before it exports, what do I need to know? In the next section of this webinar, we'll describe how a company should ensure that its food products are appropriate for the US market. Now, the US Food and Drug Administration, or FDA, has jurisdiction over most foods in the US market. Now, under their authority, they issue strict regulations regarding what ingredients may be used in food products. They also have complicated regulations that govern the labeling of food products. These regulations specify what must appear on the label, as well as rules regarding claims that can be made about the products. And many companies make the critical mistake of thinking that FDA regulations only apply to domestic U.S. producers, but this is not the case. Imported food must also comply with these regulations upon entry. FDA inspects food in port and will not release products that have improper ingredients or labeling, even if the importer intends to change the label after it arrives. Products must be compliant when they arrive at that port of entry. So smart companies will ask themselves two very important questions before shipping their food product to the US. One, are my ingredients permitted? Two, is the labeling correct? So these two issues are extremely common causes of problems for imported foods in US ports. Now, a company may ask itself why it matters. Many companies ship for years without any issues. However, it is important to note that FDA does conduct inspections in port, so particularly on goods from new shippers. If a non-compliant product is found, it is usually detained. Rarely will FDA let non-compliant goods in with only a warning. Now, if a product has an illegal ingredient, it will usually be refused entry since there's no way to remove it from the product. Products with labeling errors can be relabeled if the importer petitions FDA successfully. However, this process is expensive and time-consuming, as FDA must approve the petition and then inspect the goods after relabeling. This process can take months to resolve and can easily damage your business relationships. Also, a package with stickers covering non-compliant information is not very attractive to consumers and could negatively impact your sales. The violations then can result in a company being placed on what's called an import alert, whereby all future shipments of the product will be detained without any inspection by FDA. And this can cripple your business in the US. So the consequences of non-compliance can be completely severe. In this past year, we became involved with a detention for canned green beans and kidney beans that had been stopped for misbranding. The labeling lacked a proper net quantity statement and did not have the mandatory nutrition facts chart on the label. The importer reached out to us, and we quickly determined that we could request permission to relabel, since that was all that was wrong with the products. Now, the importer had no idea how to develop compliant labels, so he used our label comply service, through which we developed compliant labels for both products, fixing issues that FDA hadn't noticed, as well as those that they had, which could have then been an issue if left unaddressed. We then drafted the 766 request, as it's called, with the completed form, copies of the original and revised labels, and an explanation of how precisely the revised label addressed each violation, including the regulatory citations, so that FDA would know that experts had been involved. And to be sure that FDA would know that the end result would be a compliant label, we included before and after pictures to show what the results of the reconditioning would look like. We met the respond by date and got it approved, so the importer was allowed to relabel, and then we helped arrange for the reinspection after it was complete, and then the goods could be released. Now, it's a very involved and complex process, particularly drafting the 766 form. If you find yourself in this situation, you will want to be sure to address any possible reason that FDA could deny the petition. Sometimes, if they deny it, they will let you resubmit another, but not always. So it's best to get it right the first time. And so while there was a happy ending to this story, it took about 2 to 3 months to resolve, because FDA can take weeks to respond to your inquiries, and there's also the time necessary to relabel every single product in the shipment. We had a similar situation with a seasoning product that was labeled for the Chinese market and brought to the US by an importer interested in selling it here. FDA detained it for labeling violations, including the lack of a nutrition facts chart. Unfortunately, FDA refused to accept nutrient values from the manufacturer and insisted that the products get tested by a US laboratory. They gave the importer a very short time, so the the importer was forced to pay for an expedited analysis by the lab before we could even begin to create the new label. Now, the importer successfully relabeled the product, but FDA took a long time to come inspect the shipment. So the entire process took about 3 or 4 months. So the lesson here is that detentions are expensive, time-consuming, and a huge problem for a supply chain, and they must be avoided at all costs. So how does one go about figuring out whether or not products might be okay or might be in danger of being detained? You have the 2 basic steps to eliminate some of this risk. One is my formulation okay? Conduct a check of your ingredients to make sure that they are permitted in the US. Then select only those products with formulations that will be acceptable to FDA. Then 2, is my labeling okay? For these selected products, review the labeling and revise as necessary before shipping. Remember, relabeling import is expensive and time-consuming if FDA even allows you to do it. Prevent the need for relabeling by making sure it's correct before you export. Now, many companies are uncertain as how to determine if their ingredients are acceptable for the US market. So in this section of the webinar, we'll explain how FDA regulates ingredients and where they publish their regulations. So to understand if your ingredients are okay, it's important to understand how the current regulatory framework works that FDA has in place. It results in 3 primary classifications for ingredients: food additives, GROS substances, and color additives. Now, by law, all substances added to food must be approved by FDA unless they are generally recognized as safe, or GROS. The responsibility lies with industry to submit a food additive petition to FDA with data to support the safety of a substance's use in food. There are also substances deemed prior sanction as they were approved by FDA prior to 1958. Color additives, even those from natural sources, must all be approved by FDA. They are never considered GROS. They will require submission of a color additive petition by industry to support the safety of their use in food. Now, GROS substances are those that are generally recognized as safe for their intended use. They are excluded from the definition of a food additive and therefore are not subject to those approval requirements. Now, in order to figure out if your ingredients fall into one of these categories, you will need to research some specific resources. The U.S. Code of Federal Regulations includes all of the food additives and color additives that have been approved by FDA. It also includes regulations where FDA has affirmed certain substances are GROS. It's important to pay close attention to these regulations, though, as they will tell you exactly what products and intended uses are covered. For example, some are permitted generally in food, but others may be limited to only certain types of food or for certain specific uses. Now, GROS status is not limited to these GROS affirmations from FDA. GROS status is based on the opinion of the scientific community as a whole. So companies are permitted to self-affirm that an ingredient is GROS using data that is either public or privately held. If a company chooses to self-affirm an ingredient is GROS, then they should make sure that they have the data available in the event that FDA requests proof of their ingredient status. And this process has come under scrutiny lately, which we will discuss in a few slides. FDA also has a process by which a company may submit what is called a GROS notice to inform the FDA that they have determined that an ingredient is GROS. FDA may then respond whether they have any questions or concerns regarding the company's data and the company's conclusion that the substance is safe. Now, keeping up with ingredient regulations and doing a thorough check is extremely important, as regulations do change from time to time. So, for example, this year FDA has banned FD&C Red Number 3, a common color additive that is used in all sorts of products, including candy. FDA is revoking the authorization and will enforce it beginning January 15th, 2027 for food products. They have requested that industry voluntarily remove it ahead of this deadline. So if you are using this color, you should start the reformulation process now to ensure that it is removed from all products destined for the US market. You will also want to ensure that your supply chain is vetted so that products containing this color do not accidentally get sent to the US. FDA has also stated plans to revoke the approval for citrus red number 2 and orange B, 2 other synthetic color additives, but ones that are not widely used. Now, there's been quite a bit of activity recently regarding food additives, particularly these color additives. FDA and the administration announced an initiative to push for a voluntary phase out by industry of all other synthetic approved color additives by the end of 2026. And this would include common color additives such as FD&C Red 40, Yellow 5, and Blue 1. Now, there was some skepticism whether or not industry would comply, but then this past June 17th, Kraft announced their plan to remove all synthetic colors by the end of 2027. And others have followed since. Nestle, PepsiCo, General Mills have all made similar announcements in the last few months. And then to encourage the use of natural colors, FDA has approved additional naturally sourced color additives: calcium phosphate, Galdera extract blue, Gardenia Genopin blue, and have added new approvals for butterfly pea flower extract. And as I mentioned earlier, the GROS system is also on their radar and has been targeted for significant changes. The most groundbreaking change this year, or disruptive, depending on your viewpoint, is the stated intent to eliminate self-affirmation as a means to establish GROS status for an ingredient. FDA has announced plans to explore potential rulemaking to revise the GROS final rule and working with Congress to explore ways that legislation can close what they call the GROS loophole. Secretary Kennedy has asserted that companies exploit this loophole to allow new chemicals with unknown safety data into the US marketplace with no notification to FDA or the public. Elimination of this pathway would force companies to notify FDA and provide data to support an ingredient's safety. Their opinion is that the elimination of this pathway will result in greater transparency for the consumer. Now, FDA began to take action this fall when it published its spring 2025 Unified Agenda, which was not actually published until September. Now, the Unified Agenda is a list of rulemakings that the agency anticipates publishing in the coming year. It included the anticipated publication of a proposed rule to eliminate the self-affirmation pathway for GROS substances in October of 2025. It's important to understand, however, that the Unified Agenda is not binding, and FDA often does not keep its self-imposed deadlines. Nonetheless, it was pretty significant that they announced this intent. Now, the proposed rule would mandate the submission of a GROS notice for substances that a company purports to be GROS before they can be used in food. The rule would exempt substances previously affirmed as GROS or that were the subject of a no questions letter in a GROS notice inventory, meaning a GROS notice had already been filed and the FDA had no questions about its safety. Now, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your viewpoint, the US government had a shutdown, and so the most recent rulemaking was halted as most non-essential functions of the government were put on hold. At this time, it remains to be seen how quickly it gets back on track. Suffice to say, it will be important for industry to keep track of FDA actions in this regard. Now, unfortunately, many companies don't perform any sort of compliance check on their products prior to shipping and find out the hard way that their ingredients are not permitted in the US market. So one of the most common mistakes are illegal colors, because FDA must approve every color additive, even those from safe natural sources. And Common in other markets, such as Ponceau 4R and Quarmocine, are not permitted in the US. Other common color additive issues concern colors that are subject to a batch certification from FDA. For these colors, a sample from the actual batch must be sent to FDA for them to test it. So for example, Allura Red must be certified by FDA as FD&C Red number 40. Brilliant Blue is another example. It must be certified as FD&C Blue number 1. Even with the voluntary phase out that's going on, strictly speaking, these colors are still permitted in the US market, which is why I make mention of them. Now, other ingredients that can cause issues are artificial sweeteners, such as cyclamates and dulcin, which are not approved by FDA and are specifically on a prohibited list. Now, recently, FDA issued a final order that essentially bans partially hydrogenated oils due to their trans fat content. So products from other markets where they are permitted should not be sent to the US. Stevia is a very popular sweetener, and it has purity specifications, though, that must be met. FDA has an import alert for it, along with other ingredients such as tamarind, where FDA will stop these products and force the importer to prove that they meet FDA's requirements before entering the US market. And then finally, CBD. CBD is confusing because individual states in the US permit it, but at the federal level, it is not permitted to be added to food or supplements. So moving on, then our next topic will be, what are the labeling requirements? Even if your formulation is fine, your products may get stopped and inspected, and the labeling needs to be in compliance so that the FDA inspectors will permit it to enter. Now, there are certain statements that must always appear on food labeling, as shown here, that we'll discuss in depth in the next few slides. So first and foremost is the statement of identity, what the product actually is. So FDA requires that it be the name specified by law, the common or usual name used in the marketplace, but not a brand name, or a fanciful name that's understood by the general public. So for example, most of us are probably familiar with the brand Oreo and understand what that is, but that's not a statement of identity. Oreo labels have a statement of identity, chocolate sandwich cookies, to meet this requirement. Now, some products are subject to what's called a standard of identity. This is when FDA dictates what the characteristics are for a product to be identified by a particular name. This can include permitted ingredients and certain manufacturing methods that must be conducted. So examples include ice cream, jam, margarine, and peanut butter. There are about 280 standards of identity, so you will want to determine if your product is subject to one. Now, the statement of identity is also subject to other special requirements based on flavor declarations, if there are juice ingredients, when the product is in a specific form, and more. The next mandatory statement we'll discuss is the net quantity of contents. You must declare the actual quantity of product in the container. Solid and viscous products are generally declared by weight and must include the term or abbreviation for net weight. Liquid products are to be declared in terms of volume. You must include both metric and imperial terms of measurement. This is another common cause for detention. For example, a product that declares its weight in grams, but does not include the amount in ounces. Then every food label must declare either the manufacturer, packer, or distributor. You may choose any one of these three options to meet the requirement. Please do note, it must include the actual corporate name and the full address, although you may omit the street address if it's found in a local directory. FDA must have a way to contact a responsible party if they discover a problem with the product. Now, most foods, except for single ingredient foods, must declare all their ingredients on the package. Most of these ingredients must be declared by their common or usual name. No E or INS numbers can be used. Most have to be declared individually and not grouped together in parentheses either. They should be in descending order by weight. However, there are some exceptions to the rules for certain ingredients like flavors, colors, and some spices. Now, a few years ago, the U.S. Department of Agriculture issued new rules regarding the disclosure of bioengineered ingredients, or GMOs. USDA maintains a list of foods that are generally considered to be genetically modified. And so if your food product has an ingredient on that list, or if you know that any ingredient in your food is the product of bioengineering, then you must declare it on the label. USDA gives several options to meet this requirement. And even though this rule was issued by the USDA, it impacts FDA regulated products as well. Now, while it's not an FDA requirement, it's important to know that US Customs and Border Protection has a labeling requirement for the country of origin. This is where the last substantial transformation of the product took place, and it must appear on all retail food labels. Also note, you may only use abbreviations for countries that are deemed acceptable by customs. So for example, PRC is not an acceptable abbreviation for China, as a US consumer may not be familiar with it and would not realize that it stands for the People's Republic of China. Now the next and usually most difficult part of the mandatory food labeling that we'll discuss is the nutrition facts label. FDA has very specific requirements for format, content, and type sizes. Unlike some markets where nutrition labeling is simply based on 100 gram or 100 milliliter amounts, for FDA nutrition charts, the serving size must be declared based on a reference amount for that exact food that has been established by FDA. There are also some additional dual column chart requirements for products and packages that might be consumed in a single sitting, or if it's in a unit like a muffin, that could be consumed in a single sitting. There are also different formats for infant and toddler foods and when there's more than one product in a package. So we've pulled together some examples from other countries to illustrate how different the FDA chart is. So here you see the US FDA chart compared to charts from the UK, Australia, and Mexico. Again, very different. So it's obvious to FDA inspectors when a product comes in with a label that's not in compliance with this requirement. Any inspector that sees this mistake is bound to detain the product and refuse it unless the importer petitions for permission to relabel it. Now, FDA has multiple chart formats that are permitted on food labeling, subject to certain conditions. So to the left, we see the simplified format, which is permitted on certain products that don't have a lot of nutrient value. And on the upper right side of the panel and at the bottom of the panel, we see two tabular charts that are permitted on certain size packaging. And in the middle is the linear format that's permitted only on very small packaging. So if you choose to use any of these nutrition facts panels, you must make sure that your package and your product qualify. Other product packaging will now require the dual column format that I mentioned earlier, as shown on the bottom right. And this is when the package or the product, like the muffin that I referenced, is 2 to 3 times the size of the FDA reference amount for that food. So you're required to declare both sets of values in this dual column format. Now, allergens are an important part of food labeling and a very common cause for product recalls and other similar issues. Accurate allergen declarations are an important safety and labeling issue. And as we can all imagine, undeclared allergens are a significant regulatory and also legal liability. If a consumer has an allergic reaction to your product and it was not properly labeled, it could open your firm to the threat of legal action and significant financial losses. FDA has 9 mandatory food allergens that require disclosure: milk, eggs, fish, crustacean shellfish, tree nuts, peanuts, wheat, soybeans, and sesame. You may declare them as part of the ingredient name, such as wheat flour, in parentheses next to the ingredient in the list, or declare all of them in a contained statement adjacent to the list. Now, this year, FDA updated its guidance on allergens and informed us that coconut is no longer considered a tree nut and does not have to be included in the statement. Now, sometimes allergens become present due to cross-contamination in the food processing facility. In such cases, it may be smart to add advisory labeling, such as may contain or produced on equipment that also produces the allergen. Now, FDA acknowledges the use of these sorts of statements, but does not warn companies, it does warn companies that they are not a suitable replacement for rigorous manufacturing practices to mitigate the chance that the cross-contamination actually takes place. Now, in addition to the regulations regarding mandatory statements that must appear, FDA has a maze of regulations related to other labeling issues such as claims. FDA dictates when such claims can be made. So, for example, nutrient content claims refer to the levels of a nutrient in a food, such as high in fiber, low fat, and healthy. FDA sets nutrient levels that must be met in order for labels to bear these claims. Health claims refer to a risk reduction in disease that may occur due to consumption of the food. This is the only instance that I can think of where a disease can actually be referenced on a food label. And because of this, a health claim must be pre-approved by FDA. Structure function claims reference effects to the structure or function of the body due to consumption of the food. These claims are not pre-approved by FDA, but must be truthful and based on the nutritive value of the food. Now, another common labeling element are additional languages. Note that your labels must have all the mandatory statements in English. And if any other language is present, then all mandatory statements must appear in that language too. Now, there are some exceptions, like brand names and mottos in a different language may be exempt from this requirement, though, because they don't convey material information about the product. Now, due to a strong marketing advantage and consumer desire for clean labels, organic foods are now a significant part of the US market. In order to make this claim, your food will need to be certified by an agent that is accredited by the USDA, or there needs to be a memorandum of understanding in place, such as the one between the US and the EU. The claim itself will be based upon the percentage of organic ingredients in the product, and the agent's information must appear on the label. Now, in December of 2024, FDA issued a new rule that drastically changes the requirements to call a food healthy on the labeling. Companies will have until February 25th, 2028 to update their labeling to incorporate this new regulation. The previous regulation focused on individual nutrients and required certain low levels of fat, saturated fat, cholesterol, and sodium, as well as mandating that the product contain at least 10% of the daily value of a nutrient from a specific list, such as calcium, iron, and dietary fiber. Now, the old rule was issued in the 1990s, and while there were some modifications in the last few years, it still reflected outdated thinking about nutrition. The new regulation incorporates a better understanding of human nutrition and actually focuses on foods as a whole and the need for healthy dietary patterns, and shifts the focus away from the levels of individual nutrients. In fact, it doesn't even mention them at all. Now, the new requirement focuses on whole food groups like vegetables, and then foods will qualify if they have a certain number of food group equivalents, which is also defined in the rule. Also, products like water, tea, coffee, and certain oils that are low in saturated fat will automatically qualify to make this claim. Now, front of package labeling has been present in the marketplace for quite a few years, and up to this point has been voluntary. Now, there are many ways that this has been added to food. Some systems have used symbols to characterize the overall nutrient value of a food. Others have focused on individual nutrient levels. And then up to now, FDA has only objected if the agency determined that the front of package statements were false or misleading, or if they were in violation of the regulations that govern nutrient content claims. However, in its mission to help consumers make healthier food choices, FDA has now issued a proposed rule to require front of package labeling on most food products. FDA's proposed rule will require a nutrition info box that lists the percent daily values of saturated fat, sodium, and added sugars, and characterizes them as low, medium, or high. This will be required for most foods intended for people aged 4 years and older, so not going to be required for toddler or infant foods. Now, there will also be a voluntary declaration of calories that can be made adjacent to the box. FDA will also have, if this goes through, some special labeling provisions for certain packages, such as small packages. However, please do note that this is only a proposed rule. It is not final, and it could change. And it could change dramatically, which is what we saw with the change with the nutrition facts label back in 2016. The final version was very different than what was proposed in 2014. So do not add this front of package labeling to your products just yet. Now, FDA has provided an estimated date for the final rule. It's on the agency's agenda to be published in May of 2026. However, as I mentioned before, it is important to note that the unified agenda is not a strict deadline, so we'll see whether or not FDA actually meets the May 2026 date for the final rule for this. Okay. Now, companies need to be vigilant in ensuring that their labels meet FDA requirements. So here are 5 common mistakes, many of which we find routinely in the products that we review. It's very common for other markets to permit declaring ingredients by E or INS numbers, but that's not the case here. We often see companies using nutrition charts that are only permitted on small packages, not understanding the limitations of their use. And because the majority of the world relies on the metric system, many labels arrive to the US without the mandatory declaration in ounces or fluid ounces. It's also really common for labels to bear claims such as high in vitamin A when the product doesn't actually have enough to qualify according to FDA's rules. And then last but not least, if there's any non-English statement on your label, unless it's brand or a motto, you will probably need to reproduce all of the mandatory statements in that language. Now, we hope this information that we've presented gives you a good overview of how to check your product's formulation and labeling to determine if it will meet FDA requirements. If you still find the rules and the regulations are too confusing or want an expert to look over your products before you ship, Registrar Corp is here to help. Registrar Corp has many solutions to help you make sure your labels meet FDA's requirements. We offer varying levels of assistance to meet your exact needs. Now, as we've mentioned before, it's critical to make sure your formulation consists only of ingredients permitted in the US market, as well as making sure that the labeling is correct. Our Label Comply service gives you one-on-one assistance with an experienced regulatory specialist who will do a complete evaluation of your ingredients and labeling. We conduct a thorough analysis of the label for each of the mandatory statements we've discussed and make recommendations for changes to bring your label and product into compliance. We issue a report that includes all of our recommendations, and we will give you a print-ready graphic that has been revised to be in compliance with FDA labeling requirements. The service also includes a 30-day period where you can ask questions and an extra round of graphic changes to the revised label at no additional charge. Also, any client that uses our Label Comply service can count on our continued support for as long as they use our revised label, no expiration date. If FDA questions any label we produce, Registrar Corp will intervene at no cost to you, of course, to communicate with FDA and provide the research we conducted to support the compliance of the label. Now, if you are feeling pretty confident that your product label is compliant, but you still want the reassurance of a group of experienced regulatory professionals to look it over, Registrar Corp offers our label check report option. Our team will look over the 10 mandatory elements that should appear on your food label and give you guidance regarding any potential issues that we find and instructions on what changes you should make prior to exporting to the US. A report will summarize the changes, and you'll receive 30 minutes of consultation after delivery to go over our findings so we can help you implement them correctly. Now, if you're feeling pretty confident about your labeling, but you do want some help with that complicated nutrition facts label, Registrar Corp offers a service that will give you one-on-one assistance from a regulatory specialist who will help you figure out the proper reference amount and the proper serving size for your product, as well as if there's a modified label format that you may be permitted to use for your product package. We will provide you with a print-ready graphic and a report that details each recommendation and regulation that was used to develop your nutrition facts label. For companies that are still in the process of developing formulations or that are concerned that their ingredients may not be approved, Registrar Corp's ingredient review can help provide peace of mind prior to export. We will review all the ingredients in your products to verify that the ingredients are either affirmed as safe, approved as food additives, or approved as color additives by FDA. So you can save yourself the heartache of a refused shipment or a warning letter that's visible to all your customers by ensuring that your ingredients are permitted before you export. Now, for companies that have a good working knowledge of nutrition facts requirements, Registrar Corp offers a do-it-yourself solution. Our nutrition labeling software and recipe management tool will help you produce your nutrition labeling for the US and other markets. Our software solution offers downloadable charts for the US, UK, Mexican, Canadian, and EU markets based off of a single recipe for the product. It's subscription-based with lots of flexibility depending on your needs. And then finally, we have many other ways that can help you with as you market your foods in the US. Registrar Corp offers a full range of compliance services, all of which are fixed fee. We can assist you with many FDA requirements, such as food facility registration and US agent, prior notice, other labeling issues, low acid canned food requirements, food safety plans, and services to meet the requirements of the Foreign Supplier Verification Program. We can also help you if your products are being detained or are on an import alert. If you get detained, don't give up right away. Send us the FDA's notice of action for a free assessment, and we can see if and how you may be able to get the products released. We also offer custom consulting on any number of matters related to FDA regulation and enforcement, so you can harness our expertise to solve your most complex product challenges. We can offer you subject matter expertise tailored to your exact needs for however long you need it. Partner with us to make sure that your products meet FDA's requirements, and we look forward to assisting you with your successful distribution of products in the US market. We're also pleased to announce the launch of our label review services for Canada and Mexico. We offer the label comply and label check services to prepare your product labeling so that you may market your product in Canada. We also have the label comply service along with the constancia that is necessary to ensure your product labels compliance in the Mexican market. If you plan to market in either country, please reach out to us if you need any assistance. And if you are unsure about whether or not your product labels are compliant, we are here to help. You may send your product labels to us for a free assessment. We will check to see if they appear to have any compliance issues related to the mandatory labeling requirements we've discussed today. Our team of regulatory advisors will provide you with our comments and can give you information regarding our services in case you need them to change your labels before you ship to the US, Mexico, or Canada. Simply navigate to the Verify Ingredient and Labels section under the Food and Beverage tab on our webpage, and you can find the link to upload your labels. Within approximately 24 to 48 hours, we'll provide you with our comments regarding your labels compliance and then whether they should be updated prior to shipping. Now we have a special discount for you all today. Thanks for attending. You'll receive $200 off a full label comply service or $100 off the label check service between now and December 31st. Simply mention it to your regulatory advisor and the discount will be applied. Thank you so much for your time and attention. Appreciate everybody bouncing back in today after what happened yesterday. We really do appreciate it, and I hope that you found it helpful. One more thing to make mention too is Registrar Corp is the industry's preferred resource for required training, such as PCQI, HACCP, and more. So our courses are 100% online and self-paced to work with your busy schedules. We are the only provider with 100% money-back satisfaction guarantee, so you can join the 30,000 professionals who have received their certificates from Registrar Corp's professional training. Group discounts also apply if you're buying for your team. And with that, we'll open up our webinar for any questions that you may have. Please feel free to add them to the Q&A box at the top of your screen. And I'm going to hand it over to Christina.
Thank you so much, Anna. So I will be reading out the questions that people have submitted. One thing that popped up a few times was a question about what labeling requirements are there for non-retail labels. So labels intended for B2B, business to business, you know, for R&D, things like that.
Great question, great question. So, you know, generally speaking, for products that are sent wholesale, you know, for the manufacturing or processing, we strongly recommend including everything that we've talked about today, except for the nutrition facts label. Nutrition facts labels are only required on retail products. They're not required for bulk, for further processing, or for food service labels either in most cases, unless claims are being made or other nutritional information is present on the label. We strongly recommend including all the rest of the information, though, simply because when a product comes through port, it's important that the FDA inspector have a good understanding of what the product is, the ingredients that are present, and you know the other mandatory information that FDA inspectors like to have access to. You know, even if strictly speaking not necessary, sometimes FDA officers will take weeks to decide that it's not necessary, and so it's held up your shipment. So if it's not really a burden to add this information, we certainly strongly recommend it, because the regulations aren't necessarily 100% clear on what should appear on retail versus wholesale. So that's our usual strong recommendation to make.
Great, thank you, Anna. Our next question is about nutrition facts charts. Are there size requirements for the nutrition facts panel?
Thank you. Excellent question. There are minimum type sizes for all of the information that is in a nutrition facts chart. So it's a little bit different than other markets. Like, for example, Canada, I think there's a size for the box, no matter how much information is in it. FDA is different. FDA has these minimum type size requirements. Also, where you see those hairlines and bar lines, those are written into regulation. Certain nutrients have to appear in boldface type, where others do not. All of that is written into regulation. So you do have to pay really close attention to what those requirements are.
All right, great. Our next question is about the bioengineered disclosure. So do you have to state which ingredients in the product are bioengineered, or just provide a general statement that the product contains a bioengineered ingredient?
So, you know, interesting that this question is being raised, because there's been a little bit of activity in the courts over the last month or so about the bioengineered rule. But for now, the symbol will suffice. So they have a symbol that can be presented on the information panel near the manufacturer, distributor, and packer information and the ingredient information. And generally speaking, that's where it can appear. At this point, it doesn't seem that you have to actually identify the exact ingredient. Just having the symbol or a statement will suffice.
Yep, makes sense. Thank you. So our next question is about display cases. So for products that are sent in display-ready cases, like a 12-pack, but are not intended for sale as a unit, are the cases subject to same labeling requirements as those individual retail units?
So strictly speaking, they're not. We, again, would recommend, kind of like with the wholesale and the bulk, that all the information except for the nutrition facts label appear, and that there be a prominent statement that that product is not intended for retail sale. Because, again, kind of if you look at everything through the eyes of an FDA inspector, if something that's relatively small, like a 12-pack, comes through and it doesn't have the mandatory labeling, you know, they don't have any assurances that it's not going to be sold retail, even if the importer swears up and down that it's not. You know, so for display cases, particularly ones that sort of resemble something that could be sold retail, we recommend include all the information. You know, if you omit the nutrition facts chart, then include a prominent statement that the product is not intended for retail sale.
Great, thank you. This next question is another question about nutrition facts charts. Can we prepare nutritional tables in another language, for example, both English and Arabic?
Okay, excellent question, and an important question, because it's pretty common for us to see products come in where all the information is presented in English and another language, such as Arabic, but then that nutrition chart has not been translated. And as I mentioned, when you have more than one language, then you need to produce all of the mandatory information, including the nutrition facts chart, in all those languages. So in terms of the chart and by the bilingual labeling option, FDA has stated that you can either have two separate charts, one in English, one in Arabic, or you can combine them into one chart. The agency doesn't seem to have a preference, so depending on the size and the configuration of your package, that may dictate which one you decide to go with, but either one should be fine.
All right, perfect. Okay, this is another great question, which is, are there special labeling requirements for non-food products, such as body soap, shampoo, hair care products? When could these be considered under FDA, and when might they be regulated under a different government agency?
So cosmetics, generally speaking, are regulated by FDA. So there are labeling requirements that pertain to cosmetics. In fact, on December 2nd, we're giving another presentation you can sign up for. There, we're going to be talking about the global cosmetic labeling requirements for the US, Canada, the EU, and the UK. So I may be seeing an email, or you can find it on our webpage. But yeah, those products are considered cosmetics. There's one specific exemption for soaps that don't have a cosmetic function other than just cleaning, that are exempted from FDA labeling requirements. But most soaps that we find in the US marketplace, they have fragrance, they're meant to make you, smell attractive as well as clean, and so they get regulated as cosmetics. Cosmetic labeling regulations are not nearly as burdensome as food labeling requirements, but they are there. So you need to make sure that any of those products are properly labeled for the US market as well.
Great, thank you so much. And then we've gotten a couple of questions about this. Are there any FDA requirements or rules for a best before date on packaging?
So best before date is amazingly not written into regulation as far as labeling goes, but of course, most companies find that it is important to include in their labeling, simply so that a consumer does not accidentally consume a product that is either where the quality has suffered to the point where you don't want them consuming it, or there's a safety issue. So know that, of course, most companies will put a best before date, but there aren't any strict labeling requirements as far as placement or type size, or the manner in which it's presented. So you have some flexibility in that respect.
Great, thank you. So this next question is regarding beer. Someone's asking if nutrition labeling is required for beer type products.
So most beer products, if they are created or formulated using malted barley and hops, actually fall under the TTB rather than the FDA when it comes to labeling. And at this point, TTB labels are not required to have nutrition information presented on them. Now, part of that unified agenda that I mentioned, TTB may be proposing nutrition labeling, but again, US government agencies don't always stick with the deadlines that they self-impose on the unified agenda. So we'll have to wait and see. But if it does come out, it'll be a proposed rule, which means that they then will take public comment and issue a final rule later on. And so you're looking at years before something like that comes out. Do know, though, that if you have a beer that is made with more unusual ingredients like sorghum or that sort of thing, it could fall under FDA and actually have to have the nutrition facts information right now. Kind of same goes with wines. So wines that are 7% alcohol or greater are regulated by TTB, and they don't have to have it. Wines that are less than 7% or are non-alcoholic, those do have to have nutrition facts charts because they fall under FDA jurisdiction.
All right, fantastic. So this next question is another good question. This is about sulfite labeling. So they currently have a shrimp product that has a metabisulfite treatment, and they are currently declaring it in the allergen statement. However, their customers are asking for it to be put as an ingredient. Can you please advise how FDA handles that type of information?
Yes, absolutely. So the allergen statement And this seems kind of, a lot of people, and I would agree, it seems a little strange that FDA takes this stance, but the allergen statement, the contained statement that, appears on food labels, you are only allowed to put allergens that are identified by FDA as major food allergens in the FALCPA. That means that you can actually get a warning letter if you put mustard or rye or sulfites in that allergen statement. It seems a little crazy, but that is what the rule is. And that's what we see FDA doing and taking action. So you don't want to put it in the contained statement. If it is present, and I believe, keep me honest, Christine, I think it's 20 ppms or greater,
I believe
where
so.
it's detectable. FDA considers that as having a technical effect on that food. So if it is detectable at that level, then you will want to go ahead and declare that that sulfiding agent in your ingredients list as an ingredient. It would no longer be considered incidental or a technical additive that doesn't require disclosure. You need to go ahead and put it in the ingredients list.
All right, awesome. Yeah, and that particular question, they did state that it was 80 ppm, so it would apply in their particular case.
Okay.
All right, so this next question is, apart from font size requirements for nutrition labeling, are there font size requirements for other mandatory information on labels?
Yes, the rule of thumb is 1/16 of an inch, and that's generally considered to be based on the lowercase o, unless you are using all capital letters. So lots of times you'll see companies get around this by, declaring like their ingredients lists in all capital letters. So it's 1/16 of an inch overall. It gets a little bit different when you're talking about the net quantity statement. That statement is going to be based off of the size of your principal display panel. So that panel that faces the consumer at the point of sale. And strictly speaking, ounces, when you're declaring that, you should use the lowercase oz to be 100% correct with how that unit of measurement is displayed. And so then you have to consider whatever that type size that's required is going to be based off of that lowercase o. The statement of identity is supposed to be half the size of the largest text on the label. That is a recommendation from FDA because it's supposed to be conspicuous, and we've seen them actually make mention of it in during like detention situations and that sort of thing. So statement of identity should be about half the size of the largest text of the label.
Yep, great. Thanks, Anna. It looks like we might only have time for one or two more questions. So our next question is it required to include storage conditions on food labeling?
Okay, this is kind of like with the best before statement. There's no actual labeling regulation in 21 CFR 101 that actually addresses storage conditions. But again, probably in your best interest to make sure that they appear on the label so that a consumer will consume your product at its best and buy it again. One other thing that to make mention of is refrigeration and frozen statements. These are very important oftentimes for food safety. And so you want to make sure, if necessary, that they are on the labeling. FDA doesn't have strict or any regulations really on the books about how you declare a refrigeration statement. They proposed one back in like 1998 and then just never followed up on it. But so we would recommend, a prominent statement that it's important that the product remain frozen or refrigerated in order to maintain safety or in order to maintain quality, whatever the case may be.
All right, awesome. Thank you. And then I think we can wrap up with one more short question, which is, when can the linear format of the nutritional facts chart be used?
So linear formats can be used when the tabular does not fit. And this is generally speaking for products where the total surface available to bear labeling is less than 40 square inches. In essence, you really have to kind of go down the hierarchy, start with the standard. If it doesn't really fit, try the small package tabular chart. If that doesn't fit, then go ahead and use the linear. Usually the linear is only going to be appropriate for really small packages. Think like small packets of gum or rolls of mints or things like that. We're super paranoid, honestly, about the linear chart because when I first started here, we actually had a company come to us with a detention where they had been using the linear chart and FDA said, no, that's not big enough. You can absolutely fit a bigger chart on this. So we tend to be really, really paranoid about it. and we will maintain proof that we tried to add a tabular chart and it didn't fit, and so we used the linear, and then we save that version just in case we need to show it to FDA. We've never had to, but we have we keep it just to be on the safe side, because there are really only a few certain circumstances in which it can be used.
Great. Yeah, thank you for all the information. And with that, we will conclude our webinar. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. Please do take our short 3-question survey to give us feedback and suggest any additional topics you would like us to cover in future webinars. Have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.